Martha Williams stood by the window of her home in Boston's old residential neighborhood, gazing at the afternoon light filtering through the trees. There was an air of dignity about her, with her silver-gray hair neatly arranged over her shoulders. On the table in the center of the room, several picture frames were lined up. Martha's gaze settled on one particularly cherished photo, her granddaughter Emma smiling broadly. In recent years, her relationship with her daughter Carol had grown cold. Carol had married Richard Hudson, a successful businessman, and lived in an upscale neighborhood about 40 minutes by car from Martha's modest home. Martha was rarely permitted to visit their mansion. "Emma, is tomorrow still good for you to come to Grandma's?" Martha asked her granddaughter on the phone. "Yes, I'll come straight over after school." Emma's voice was filled with anticipation. "I'll bring my new watercolor painting too. My teacher praised it." Martha smiled. 14-year-old Emma was blessed with artistic talent. Her paintings had a sensitivity and depth unlike other children her age. "I'm looking forward to it. I'll bake those chocolate chip cookies you love." After hanging up, Martha felt a bit downhearted. She knew Carol wasn't pleased about Emma's frequent visits to her grandmother's house. But Carol never directly objected. That was probably because Richard maintained the appearance of someone who valued family bonds. Thinking about Richard always made Martha feel a tightness in her chest. He was known as a prominent local real estate developer. In social settings, he displayed a charming and friendly attitude and actively participated in charitable activities. He was celebrated in local business circles as a rising star in the business world. However, Martha had glimpsed another side to her son-in-law beyond his public persona. Richard had a desire to control everything. He was particularly perfectionistic at home and tended to become irritable if things didn't go exactly his way. Carol gradually began watching her husband's moods, and the traces of the once bright and independent daughter had faded. Martha began to feel a rift in her relationship with Carol a few years after Emma was born. Carol started prefacing her responses to her mother's opinions or suggestions with "Richard says." Martha's advice on raising grandchildren or suggestions about household habits all had to be filtered through Richard's way of thinking. Fortunately, Emma treasured her bond with her grandmother. When Richard was away on business trips or Carol was busy with social events on weekends, Emma would sometimes stay overnight at Martha's house. Those times were Martha's greatest treasure. "Grandma, look at this." Emma had found an old album last weekend and was delighted. "This is a photo of Mom when she was my age. Do I look like her?" "Yes, you do. But you have a stronger core," Martha answered, stroking her granddaughter's head. "Your mother tended to worry too much about what others thought, but you have your own solid ideas." Emma nodded silently. After a brief pause, she said in a small voice, "Dad gets angry when I don't do what he says. Mom always stays quiet." Martha felt a pain in her chest. Emma had gradually begun to confide about the situation at home. About Richard's strict discipline and Carol's silence. It seemed to go beyond just being a strict father. The next day, Martha waited by the window from early afternoon for her granddaughter. But Emma didn't appear at the usual time. Just as Martha was beginning to worry, the phone rang. It was Carol. "Mom." Carol's voice was trembling. "Emma has been taken to the hospital after an accident." Martha's world froze in an instant. "What do you mean? What happened?" She fell down the stairs at home, hit her head hard. Carol's words were faltering. "She's in the intensive care unit at St. Mary's Hospital now. The doctor says she's in a coma." Martha, still gripping the phone, was momentarily speechless. Then she quickly regained her practical thinking. "I'm coming right away." When Martha rushed into St. Mary's Hospital, she didn't even have time to ask for directions to the intensive care unit. She pushed past people walking ahead of her, desperately following the signs. After passing through corridors permeated with the characteristic smell of disinfectant and a quiet tension, she finally reached the ICU waiting room. Carol and Richard were already there. Carol looked pale, her eyes red and swollen, but she didn't appear to be crying. Richard stood with his back straight, talking seriously with someone who looked like a doctor. Both stopped when they noticed Martha's arrival. "Mom, you came." Carol's voice was so flat it contained not a trace of emotion. "How is Emma?" Martha asked breathlessly. Richard stepped forward and placed a hand on Martha's shoulder. The gesture seemed caring, yet somehow calculated. "Martha, calm down. Dr. Parker was just explaining Emma's condition." The middle-aged male doctor in a white coat turned to Martha. "Ms. Williams, your granddaughter's condition is very serious. She fell down the stairs at home and suffered a severe head injury. There's intracranial bleeding, and her brain is under pressure." Martha felt her legs weaken. She sank into a nearby chair and managed to ask, "Is she conscious?" "She's currently in a deep coma. She's dependent on life support." The doctor's voice was matter of fact. "To be honest, we believe the chances of recovery are low. But there is a possibility, isn't there?" Martha looked desperately into the doctor's eyes. The doctor hesitated for a moment before answering. "Modern medicine can't make absolute statements, but complete recovery from this type of brain injury is extremely rare. I think the family should prepare themselves." Richard touched the doctor's arm and said, "Doctor, could we discuss this in more detail in private?" The doctor nodded silently, and the two disappeared into a small consultation room down the hall. Martha sat next to Carol. "How did she fall down the stairs?" "Emma is always so careful." Carol averted her gaze. "I don't know the details either. I was in the kitchen at the time. I heard a noise and rushed over to find Emma collapsed at the bottom of the stairs." "So you didn't see it happen?" Carol bit her lip. "Richard found her first and called the ambulance." Martha tried to take her daughter's hand, but Carol subtly pulled away. Martha studied her daughter's face intently. There should be sadness, but beyond that, some other emotion, fear perhaps, or guilt, seemed to flicker beneath the surface. "Can I see Emma?" "If the doctors allow it." Carol's words were hesitant. "There are ICU rules." At that moment, Richard and the doctor returned from the hallway. Richard's expression now showed a hint of relief that wasn't there before. The doctor was holding a chart and giving instructions to a nurse. "Martha," Richard said in a gentle voice. "Dr. Parker says he can show you Emma's condition. Just for a short time, though." Beyond the heavy doors, Emma lay in a corner of the intensive care unit. Surrounded by countless tubes and machines, her frail body looked small on the bed. Her face showed signs of bruising, and her forehead was wrapped in bandages. Her usually vibrant expression was gone, and she lay as quiet as if she were sleeping. Martha took her granddaughter's hand and whispered, "Emma, Grandma's here." There was no response. Only the regular beeping of the monitor echoed through the room. For the next few hours, Martha remained by Emma's side. Carol and Richard appeared occasionally but never stayed long. Richard repeatedly had private conversations with the doctor and seemed to be signing documents. In the evening, a young female nurse came to check on Emma. Her name tag read Rachel Collins. "She's your granddaughter." Rachel quietly addressed Martha. "You've been here all this time." "Yes, I don't want to leave her." Martha looked up at the nurse with tired eyes. While checking Emma's vital signs, Rachel asked, "Have the family members left?" "My daughter and son-in-law say they're handling paperwork." Martha shook her head. "Those two, something seems off. My daughter, her child is between life and death, yet she shows more anxiety than grief." Rachel's hand paused momentarily. "I see." She drew the curtain slightly and checked outside the room before lowering her voice. Actually, I've been concerned about something too. What do you mean? In cases of falls like this, Emma's injuries don't quite match the typical pattern we'd expect. Emma's injuries. She paused as if choosing her words carefully. They don't seem consistent with a simple fall downstairs. Martha's heart began to race. What are you saying? I can't say for certain. But I'm also concerned about the numerous private conversations between Dr. Parker and Mr. Hudson. Rachel checked her surroundings again. Dr. Parker is also Mr. Hudson's personal physician. I've heard they go way back. Conversations with Emma from the past few months flashed through Martha's mind like a slideshow. Grandma, Dad wants a perfect family. But I always fail to meet his expectations. Mom is always silent in front of Dad. I think she's afraid. Last week, Dad got really angry when he saw my report card. He was hitting the wall. Martha gently touched Emma's forehead. How many secrets were hidden inside this fragile body? Had she missed something important? Should she have listened more carefully to Emma's words? Visiting hours end in 15 minutes, Rachel kindly informed her. But if you come first thing tomorrow morning, you can see me before my shift changes. If anything comes up. Martha understood Rachel's intention. Thank you. I'll definitely be here. The next day, Martha returned to the hospital first thing in the morning as promised. She had barely slept all night, thinking constantly about Emma. Having left home before dawn, the hospital corridors were still quiet, with few visitors. On her way to the intensive care unit, Martha ran into Carol and Richard. The two were talking seriously about something, but they stopped their conversation when they saw Martha. Mom, so early. Carol's voice held a note of surprise. I'm going to see Emma, Martha said straightforwardly. Richard stepped forward and said, Martha, we've just come from visiting Emma. According to the doctors, her condition is unchanged from yesterday. We have an appointment with a lawyer and the insurance company now. Insurance? Martha couldn't help but ask. Yes, about the medical costs, Carol quickly explained. It might be a long-term treatment. She swallowed her words. You'll be coming back. Martha looked at them intently. Of course, Richard answered. But we have a full schedule today. We also have important matters to discuss with Dr. Parker. They left hurriedly. Martha watched them go, feeling the lump in her chest grow larger. The couple's behavior was far too unnatural. What on earth was happening? When she entered the intensive care unit, Rachel was checking a patient's chart. She noticed Martha and gave a small wave. Good morning, Ms. Williams. You came as promised. Any change in Emma? Rachel shook her head. Her vitals are stable, but there's no change in her consciousness. After checking the surroundings, she added in a low voice, Actually, I've been working continuously since last night's shift. I was concerned about Emma. Martha touched the nurse's arm gratefully. Thank you. Actually, Rachel lowered her voice even further. This morning, Dr. Parker changed Emma's medication orders. From a standard protocol perspective, I find some aspects questionable. Martha's expression tightened. What do you mean? I can't go into details, but... Rachel hesitated. Anyway, if you notice anything concerning, please let me know immediately. My shift ends in 30 minutes, though. Rachel opened the curtain and guided Martha to Emma's bedside. Just like yesterday, Emma lay quietly surrounded by machines. Martha sat in the chair beside the bed and gently held Emma's hand. Emma, it's Grandma. I'm back. Naturally, there was no answer. Martha gazed at her granddaughter's face. Her once lively granddaughter now lay motionless like a doll. But looking closely, her complexion seemed worse than yesterday. Emma, I don't know if you can hear me, Martha began speaking in a whisper. But Grandma will protect you. I intend to find out what happened, the truth. Just then, a voice came through the speakers, 10 minutes until the end of visiting hours. Families, please prepare to leave. Martha sighed. She wanted to stay longer with Emma. But she had to follow the hospital rules. She slowly stood up and lightly kissed Emma's forehead. I'll come back later. Grandma isn't going anywhere. As Martha was about to let go of Emma's hand, she felt something strange. There seemed to be a small piece of paper wedged between Emma's thin fingers. Martha checked her surroundings. No other staff were present. Rachel was with another patient. Martha quietly opened Emma's hand and carefully removed the piece of paper. It was a scrap from a hospital memo pad. When she unfolded it in her palm, it read in trembling handwriting. Grandma, help me. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. This handwriting was unmistakably Emma's. She looked at her granddaughter's face again. How could a granddaughter supposedly in a complete coma leave such a message? When did she write it? Various questions raced through her mind. After a moment's hesitation, Martha squeezed Emma's hand once more. And she felt a faint but definite movement, a slight pressure from Emma's fingers. Emma. Martha called her granddaughter's name with surprise and hope. Can you hear me? If you can hear me, squeeze my hand again. After a few seconds of silence, there was another faint pressure. It was clearly an intentional movement. Emma was conscious. At least, she wasn't in the complete coma the doctors claimed. Martha hurried to the nurse's station where Rachel was organizing documents. Rachel, can you come to Emma's room quickly? The nurse immediately responded to Martha's urgent demeanor, and the two returned to Emma's bedside. Martha showed her the piece of paper. This came from Emma's hand. Rachel looked at the paper and gasped. This is... And when I squeezed her hand, Emma squeezed back. Twice. Rachel quickly checked the surroundings and then closed the door. While checking Emma's vital signs, she quietly said, "This completely contradicts what the doctors have been saying. If she were truly in a coma, intentional movements would be impossible." What does that mean? Is Emma conscious? Rachel bit her lip. That's why I questioned Dr. Parker's medication orders. The combination of drugs being administered to Emma is, she continued, choosing her words carefully, more powerful than standard sedatives and could potentially create a comatose state. Martha was shocked. Artificially? Why would anyone do that? I can't be certain, Rachel said cautiously. But let's check one thing. She gently pulled back Emma's bed covers and rolled up the sleeve of her hospital gown. There were dark bruises on Emma's arm. And on her shoulder as well. This bruising pattern cannot be explained by a fall downstairs alone. Rachel's voice had regained its professional composure. It looks like someone grabbed her. Forcefully. Like abuse. Martha's voice trembled. I can't say for certain, Rachel quickly replied. But this situation is very suspicious. The fact that Emma can move consciously doesn't match the medical condition being described. Martha stood up and looked at Rachel with a determined expression. What should we do? First, I have a duty to report this to the head nurse, Rachel said. However, considering the relationship between Mr. Hudson and Dr. Parker, I'm not sure how seriously it will be taken. I'll contact a lawyer, Martha said immediately. An old friend I trust. And do we need to collect some evidence? The paper message is important evidence, Rachel said. Also, I'll make copies of Emma's condition and medication records. I'll compile the clinically unusual aspects. And Emma, will she remain like this? Martha asked fearfully. Rachel answered hesitantly. We can't stop the medication immediately. That would be dangerous. But I'll do my best to adjust to appropriate dosages within my authority. And she checked the clock. My shift is ending, but my colleague Daniel is trustworthy. I'll discreetly brief him on the situation. Martha squeezed Emma's hand once more. I'll act right away. Emma, Grandma will protect you. I promise. After leaving the hospital, Martha took out her cell phone and without hesitation selected Frank Morris from her contact list. Frank was a friend of 30 years and one of the most trusted lawyers in Boston. Frank, it's an emergency, Martha's voice trembled in the car. Can we meet today? Martha, what's happened? Frank's voice immediately showed concern. My granddaughter Emma is in the hospital. Officially it's an accident, but... Martha briefly explained the situation, about the paper note, Emma's response, and the nurse's suspicions. I understand, Frank's voice had regained its composure. Come to my office in an hour. I'll take some preliminary actions before then. Next, Martha called Sarah Jenkins, a former police officer. Sarah was the wife of a colleague of Martha's late husband Thomas, and they had maintained their friendship after his death. She now worked as a private investigator. Sarah, I need your help. Anything, Sarah's response was immediate. An hour later, Martha was at Frank Morris's law office in an old stone building downtown. Sarah had already arrived in the reception room. Frank stood up as soon as he saw Martha and took both her hands in his. Martha, sit down. First, look at this. Frank placed a document on the desk. This is an application for an emergency guardianship order. I called a judge this morning and explained the situation. He said he's willing to hear the case unofficially. Guardianship? Martha asked with a confused expression. It's an order that temporarily gives you the right to make medical decisions for Emma, Frank explained. If, as you say, there's something suspicious going on, it might be dangerous to leave decisions to Emma's parents, especially Richard Hudson. Sarah leaned forward. I've already begun preliminary research on Richard Hudson. On the surface, he's a successful businessman, but there are several concerning points. What do you mean? Martha asked. About his first marriage, Sarah opened her notebook. 10 years ago, he divorced his first wife. The divorce records are sealed, but according to my contacts from my police days, there were allegations of domestic violence. However, no formal charges were filed. Martha gasped. Did you tell Carol? She probably doesn't know, Sarah shook her head. Furthermore, there are suspicious aspects to Hudson Real Estate Development's financial situation. While it appears prosperous on the surface, there are rumors that internally they're having funding problems. Especially their recent large project, Riverside Manor, which seems to be stalled due to environmental regulation issues. Frank interjected, I also looked into Dr. Parker. He received substantial research grants from a hospital foundation where Richard Hudson serves as a board member. A clear conflict of interest. Points began connecting in Martha's mind. Emma might have learned about Richard's wrongdoing. It's possible, Sarah nodded. 14-year-old children understand more than adults think. If Emma saw or heard something, then she became a liability, Frank continued. Especially if he was financially desperate. Martha stood up. What should we do? First, please sign this application, Frank held out the documents. I plan to meet with the judge today. As evidence, we need Nurse Rachel's memo and photos of Emma's message. Martha took out the piece of paper, took a photo with her smartphone, and handed it to Frank. Next, we need to go to the police, Sarah said. My former colleague, Detective Detmer, will listen to our story. However, the evidence is still just circumstantial. We need something more concrete. What about Carol? Martha asked worriedly about her daughter. Frank chose his words carefully. She might also be a victim in this situation. But at this stage, we don't know how involved she is. We need to approach her cautiously. That evening, Martha and Sarah were meeting with Detective Detmer at Boston Police Headquarters. The middle-aged, thin detective listened seriously to their story on Sarah's introduction. There are certainly several suspicious points, Detective Detmer said. However, Mr. Hudson is a prominent figure in the community. It's difficult to act without solid evidence. There's no time, Martha pleaded desperately. Emma might be in danger. At that moment, Martha's cell phone rang. It was from Frank. Martha, the judge has issued the emergency guardianship order. I'm heading to the hospital now. Let's meet there. Rachel greeted Martha and the others who arrived at the hospital with an urgent expression. Ms. Williams, thank goodness, she said quietly. Mr. Hudson and Dr. Parker have started the process of transferring Emma to another facility. They say it's a private long-term care facility, but when I checked into the facility, it's very closed and its reputation is. Detective Detmer responded immediately. Let's show them the court order. They reached the outside of the ICU where Richard and Dr. Parker were intensely arguing. Carol stood a little distance away, looking pale and frightened. Richard Hudson, Detective Detmer said in an official tone. This is an emergency guardianship order from the court. The right to make medical decisions for Emma Hudson has temporarily been transferred to Martha Williams. Richard's face turned red with anger. What? This is a family matter. Detective, this situation is based on medical judgment, Dr. Parker interjected. The patient's condition is extremely unstable and. It's precisely that medical judgment that's the issue, Rachel stepped forward. There are serious contradictions between Emma's symptoms and her medication pattern. I've formally submitted the records. Richard looked at Carol. Carol, say something. They're trying to take our daughter away. Carol said in a trembling voice, did Emma really fall down the stairs? With those words, the air in the room froze. Richard's expression changed. From anger to fear. Of course, he tried to force a smile. Why would you ask that? Yesterday, the door to your study was open, Carol continued. After Emma collapsed on the floor, before you called the ambulance, I heard you on the phone. Saying the problem has been taken care of. Detective Detmer turned to Richard. Mr. Hudson, I'd like to speak with you at the police station. I'm calling my lawyer, Richard said coldly. Of course, Detective Detmer replied matter-of-factly. That's your right. On a spring afternoon with sunlight pouring into Martha's garden, Emma sat on a wooden deck bench, drawing in her sketchbook. 3 months had passed since the incident, and she was gradually returning to her daily life. Physical therapy was still ongoing, but she was recovering at a speed that exceeded doctors' expectations. Emma, I brought some lemonade, Martha appeared with a tray. The clear glass pitcher contained fresh lemonade, and the ice made a pleasant clinking sound. Thank you, Grandma, Emma smiled. Her smile was beginning to regain its former brightness. Martha sat beside Emma and peered at the sketchbook. What are you drawing? Plans for our new home, Emma answered. I was thinking about the layout for the apartment Mom is renting. Carol was proceeding with divorce proceedings from Richard and preparing to start a new life with Emma. She was confronting her own weakness and struggling daily with guilt for failing to protect her daughter, but she was gradually regaining confidence while receiving counseling. That's lovely, Martha gently stroked her granddaughter's head. The kitchen is spacious. Mom said she wants to start cooking again, Emma's eyes sparkled. Like she used to. Richard was currently indicted for child abuse and corporate fraud and was out on bail. As the shadows of his company were being revealed one after another, his former glory had fallen to the ground. However, he continued to deny his crimes to the end, insisting everything was a misunderstanding. Hey, Grandma, Emma suddenly became serious. I've decided what I want to do in the future. What is it? I want to be a counselor, Emma closed her sketchbook. A job helping children like me. I want to help children who live in fear of people like Dad. Martha felt a warmth in her chest. She was deeply impressed by her granddaughter's strength in overcoming a painful experience and trying to use it to help others. That's a wonderful choice, Emma. The sound of the front door opening was heard, and Carol appeared carrying shopping bags in both hands. Her expression was softer than before, and her eyes held a determined look. I'm home. Shall we prepare dinner? Emma, will you help? Yes. Emma stood up. I remembered I had something to show Grandma. Emma ran into the room and quickly returned. In her hand was an envelope. Open it. When Martha opened the envelope, there was a card inside. On its cover was a beautifully watercolored image of 3 women, Martha, Carol, and Emma. Inside the card, in Emma's careful handwriting, it read, Grandma, thank you. You taught me what a real family is. Martha embraced her granddaughter. There would still be many difficulties ahead for them. But the bond they now shared, forged by truth and love, was strong enough to withstand any storm. The 3 women had joined hands and were taking the first step into a new life.